Okay, now you can hear me. Hello, everybody. Thank you for being at this session. I know that this session is competing with a lot of other really interesting sessions that are going on at the same time, so I'm glad that you chose us, and boy, is everybody else going to be jealous, because we're going to solve all the revenue issues for the entire news industry right now. So we are streaming as well, so for those that are watching on the stream, they will also benefit. My name is Vivian Schiller, and I will be your moderator today. The subject, the title of this panel is Why Funding Journalism Matters. So we're going to take care of answering that question in the first 15 seconds of the panel, which is that none of you would be here in Perugia in this room at this festival if you didn't think funding quality journalism matters. And I'm happy to debate that topic, if you like, a little bit later. But instead, for at least the time being, I'm going to pivot over to what is perhaps a more urgent issue, which is what are the ways that we can figure out to fund quality journalism? That's what we're going to be focusing on today. As you know, because you are in this industry and you're in this panel, these are difficult times, and I tend to be an optimist by nature. So I know that there are going to be not just a solution, but multiple solutions. But just to recap, just to depress you a little bit before we cheer you up, it is sort of a perfect storm right now, as all of you know, with ad blocking now so easily available on mobile devices, and with its popularity, therefore, then increasing sort of people are reversing back and adopting more ad blocking on websites. CPMs for digital display advertising are significantly down. Really, programmatic buying has moved things, is driving prices lower and lower down to the seller. More and more content, as you know, is being consumed on platforms rather than on publishers' owned and operated websites or apps. So much of it now, again, being consumed on more and more on Facebook and Snapchat, and those platforms, of course, optimizing for the ease of consumption on those platforms, which makes it more difficult to monetize. And yet, somehow, the cost of creating quality journalism, the cost to actually send people to far-flung places, to bear witness, to interview people, to do first-hand reporting, doesn't seem to be getting cheaper. Of course, there are many tools, and we'll talk about those, that do bring some cost of journalism down, but the core function of first-person quality journalism, again, remains pretty expensive. Now, there are many models out there that you're aware of. Of course, advertising, both for print and digital, is not disappeared by a long shot. Subscriptions are proving to be quite successful, at least staunch the bleeding for many. And of course, everybody's absolute favorite revenue model is to find yourself a billionaire to pay for everything that you're doing. However, billionaires are in short supply, particularly after Panama Papers. There may be fewer of them. And so we're going to spend the next this is actually an hour and a half. We may not go for an hour and a half. This session talking about is what are some of the interesting, promising, unique business models out there. I think one thing we can probably agree is for most people there's not going to be one but multiple business models, a portfolio of revenue opportunities that will allow us to continue to do the work that we do. So with that, I'm going to introduce our panelists. We have, for your convenience, sat under our names. Oh, our names are gone, but when that other slide goes on. So immediately to my right is Maria Ramirez, who's the deputy editor and co-founder of El Español. And they'll talk a little bit more about their publications and what they do when I ask them to speak. Next is Celeste. Oh gosh, so Celeste, what's your last name? Lecomte. Sorry, Celeste Lecomte, who is the director of business affairs for ProPublica. Then we have Maaike Goslinge, who is the international editor for the Dutch online investigative journalism platform De Correspondent. I'm sure I've completely mangled that pronunciation. And finally, my friend Joyce Barnathan, who is the president of the International Center for Journalists an organization I'm proud to serve as a trustee for that looks across the developing world, and not all exclusively developing world, helping news organizations be successful at what they do, including funding. So she'll have some interesting perspectives there. So I've asked each of the panelists to just speak for a few minutes about, to really focus really on sort of almost they'll talk about their entire revenue portfolio, but to really focus on sort of a singular, unique form of revenue, just to get our juices flowing. I'll have each of them describe one of those, a little bit of those for a few minutes. Then I've got questions myself, and we'll open it up to the floor. So with that, Maria, I'll start with you.
Okay, great. Thanks a lot. Grazie a tutti per essere qui questo pomeriggio. And well, I'm going to talk a bit about El Español, that you may know. We were born last year in January. And what is more peculiar about us is the way we were born, using crowdfunding, but also a kind of crowdfunding that is not usually used for newspapers. At the very beginning, we thought about using crowdfunding just for small projects, but then, pushed by some readers on Twitter, actually, we decided to try crowdfunding, like a bigger crowdfunding for the whole project. And also, we decided to try equity crowdfunding, meaning that the readers wouldn't be just subscribers or supporters, but they would be actually shareholders of the company. We look at some models in Europe, also from like the one from our colleague Maika, the correspondent, and another German one called Crowd Reporter, and they were very successful in doing crowdfunding, but in the traditional way of supporters, subscribers. We thought about equity crowdfunding because we really saw an opportunity where people could get more involved in the company, more interested in the company. And well, we didn't know if it would work. It was something fairly new in Spain, just the crowdfunding, and something like that had never been done in Spain. And as far as we know, probably for media, it has never been done anywhere. And well, we started with a small platform, not even a very well-known one. It was just a small platform from Barcelona. And suddenly, money kept coming. I mean, we were doing this crowdfunding for 1 month, or 1 month and a few days, and we finally got 3.6 million euros from 5,600 people. They could invest at least 100 euros, and the maximum was 10,000 euros. And well, for us, it was very surprising. It was the world record for crowdfunding for any media projects anywhere, as far as we know. And it definitely helped the context in Spain, because at that moment, particularly last year, there was sort of annoyance about the traditional newspapers, that anything that was perceived as traditional. We have new parties in Spain. Like after the crisis, there was like some hunger for something new in politics, new in media, and that definitely helped us a lot. Also, we have an editor who is very popular and who was fired after publishing some uncomfortable stories for the government, and that, of course, really helped. And well, and we started publishing in a blog some stories, like with a different tone compared to other stories usually published in the Spanish press, like more data-driven, more explanations, long profiles, and of course an investigative journalism. And with that, and a very strong campaign also on Twitter and Facebook, we got this enormous amount for crowdfunding. And well, the equity choice, the equity crowdfunding, was really a mess because we have to just also hire lawyers, and it's much more complicated than a regular crowdfunding. But we think that that was one of the keys of our success, the fact that readers could be really part of the company, could own the company. So, well, we are thinking now that maybe we could repeat that experience in the future when we maybe would like to expand the project, but that's something that really worked well for us, and well, that's the most special part about our kind of funding.
Just two follow-up questions
No.
for me. Was your sort of pitch for the crowdfunding, was it around particular stories, or was it for the idea, just the idea of your publication?
Was for the idea, although we were showing also stories.
Right.
But our pitch was for independent journalism and another way to tell stories. That was our main pitch. Yeah.
And you said the range of contribution could be from 100 to 10,000 euros. Where
Yeah.
did most of them? Was it mostly all the low end, or did you get a few high end?
The
donors?
average was 500 euros.
500. Wow,
Yeah.
that's impressive. Great. Thank you. Well, we'll come back to this. This is really, really interesting model. Celeste?
Yeah. Hello. As she said, I'm Celeste Lecomte, and I am the Director of Business Affairs for ProPublica. I have only been there since November, and the organization has existed since 2007. I assume many of you have heard of ProPublica, but if not, we are an investigative and accountability nonprofit news organization based mostly in New York, focused almost exclusively on the US. As an organization, we started in 2007 and with the support of Urban Marion Sandler and their foundation, and they've been our sort of primary backers over that time period. But today, our budget is at $13 million, and only a small share of that comes from our founders. However, the vast majority of our funding does still come from foundations, major donors, major gifts, grants, things like that. I am actually going to talk about the 1% to 2% of our business that comes from things that are not those revenue sources. So I was hired in November to focus on earned revenue opportunities, strategic partnerships, and eventually more individual giving work at the smaller level, but not yet. So the thing that I'm working on today is a project that was begun by my colleagues about 2 years ago, which is our data store. So among the things that we do, most of our investigations have a really strong foundation in data on the reporting side of things. So as we report things out, our journalists are collecting public data sources or putting things together on their own and creating these large databases on which to make their analysis. Many of our stories publish with interactive news applications, which allow people to sort of look up things like their doctor or schools in their neighborhood and to do more research on their own from that data. We realized that there were a ton of people who were using that data for a variety of sources. So we started making public data that we received through public records requests or that we downloaded from other places ourselves free on our website. And as we were doing this with each of our stories, we realized that there was probably a better way to do this more consistently so that people could find that data. So we compiled it into a online sort of portal where people could find links to data that we'd used, download data sources that we had ourselves. And then we realized that there was more value that existed in that data that we had done our reporting work on. So we also sell data sets that we have done additional work on, cleaning it up, reporting it out, adding sort of qualitative metrics to it along the way. And so we are now growing that business out. So I've taken that over since I arrived in November, and I'm looking for a lot more opportunities to build on top of that data business and find more new customers. The range of our users for that data includes journalists, academics, but then also a large range of very commercial users. Our healthcare data sets are particularly interesting to people right now. The US healthcare market is completely insane and has a lot of complexity, and information about different providers and different hospital systems is difficult to get, and so we make that data available to anybody who wants to use it. So commercial consumer-facing companies like Yelp license our data to display on doctor and hospital profiles. We also have everything, including the range of folks who are building other tools for consumers to use, or insurance companies who use the data to do some benchmarking about providers in their network or add information to their provider directories, and all the way down to people like pharmaceutical reps who want to know which doctors are prescribing drugs that their competitors make so that they can go and do sales to them. So that stuff is not related to our journalism, but it does provide a pretty solid revenue source for continuing that kind of data-driven work that we're known for. So we think there's a lot more opportunity to grow there, and that's what I'll be working on.
Great. A couple of follow-up questions from me. Have you had any pushback about from any of your people that are licensing the data from you about you sub-licensing what is publicly available data?
Anything that we got in sort of public form, we make available for free. So no, not really.
Yeah.
The things that we have done have provided a great deal of value to our customers. And for example, we just published a large analysis looking at payments that doctors have taken from pharmaceutical companies and compared that with their prescribing practices. Those are two public data sets that come from the federal government, but they don't use the same method of identification between doctors in one data set and doctors in another. So we developed a method for matching those data sets. And so one of the things that we publish is a data set that crosswalks those two pieces of public data, plus our sort of cleaned up and analyzed versions that include sort of statistical analysis looking at who are the real outliers in those data sets. So now you can really connect the dots. And so we'll charge for that kind of like heavily reported, analyzed set of data that's had a lot of work done to it. But then the original data sets from the federal government are available for free.
And do you have tiered pricing? Like, does a journalist pay the same thing as a pharmaceutical company?
No, so
That
we
was
have
a
sort
slow
of
pitch.
we have a standard sort of commercial price, but then the journalist and academic pricing is part of our mission as an organization, so we offer pretty steep discounts for that. If you look at our data store on our website, you'll see that the majority of our journalist pricing is in the neighborhood of $200. And academic pricing is in the range of about $2,000. But that really depends on sort of who we're talking about. If that's like a research group that's doing it and there are several universities involved, or if it's an undergraduate student who's doing a term paper, we'll often work with them at closer to the journalist pricing. So we try to make sure that in terms of meeting our public interest mission, we take that into account in terms of making things available for sale along those lines as well.
Great, really interesting. Micah, you've got an interesting model.
Yes, hello everyone. Really good to see your faces. Let me first introduce myself. My name is Maaike Goslinga, or Gosling, if you prefer that. I work as the international editor at The Correspondent, which is a Dutch publication. And I actually made a short presentation because I think our creative agency, who designed everything for us and worked with us in-house, would appreciate this. Well, let me just first start to talk a little bit about The Correspondent, because our business model is intertwined with our philosophy as a platform. We started out as a crowdfunding initiative. We used to have the world record until El Español beat us to it. We had 18,700 something contributors. And we crowdfunded over €1 million. So that was a really good start. And over the years, we've developed as a self-sustainable ad-free platform. We have around 48,000 members now who pay €60 a year or €6 a month to read our content. Let me quickly guide you through our guiding or founding principles. The first one is that we believe that news is flawed. We'd like to think that if you read the news, you don't really understand how the world works at all, because news is focused on exceptions and not on rules. What we'd like to do at The Correspondent is actually focus on underlying structures, things that shape our lives, things that we normally don't really notice, but so yes, that's a new kind of reporting that we actually do. The second is that we prefer or we choose ideals over ideology. We think our we are an author-driven platform, and we think that news is not objective. There's always some subjectivity that is rooted in the way you report or the content you choose, etc. So authors or writers, we don't really call them writers, we call them conversation leaders, and they guide you as a reader through a certain topic, through a certain theme. And next one, the third one, and this panel is about funding, so I would like to highlight some couple of funding opportunities we've tapped into. Basically, our philosophy is that we prefer or we choose journalism over profit. As I said, we're ad-free. This is what our front page looks like today. You can see that it's all about peace and quiet, and I actually want to quote my editor-in-chief here. I asked him, we talked a little bit about ads, and then he said, well, the first thing about ads is that it distracts. They distract from the content. It's like buying a car with windshields that keep on going, with broken windshields, basically. And I agree, because you already pay for the publication, and if you also get to see ads that you don't really want to see, it distracts. So this is just an ordinary front page. We have, let me see, something that's really important, and that's how we actually get people to pay for us, is that we invest in reader-journalist relationships. And we do this in multiple ways, but one way in which we do this is by actually just engaging with readers in the comment sections, with journalists acting as conversation leaders, as moderators, as it were. So this is a typical comment section here. We actually don't want to call them comments, but conversations in which people can take part. On top of that, we have a publishing house. This is a book that's going to be published on the 16th of April. It's written by one of our correspondents. And if you'd like to read more, I would suggest you go to that URL. We also have a speakers bureau where you can actually invite our correspondents, and a big part of our revenue also comes from invitations to events and congresses, etc. What I'm doing is I also want to look into opportunities to extend our network and collaborate with reporters abroad and make the correspondent a bigger platform abroad. And this is quite interesting because we want to be financially transparent, so we actually publish how we spend our money. And here you can see a nice pie chart of how we do that. Unfortunately, 17.3% is tax. It's just a flaw in our laws because we're an online medium, not print. So, but by doing this, we want to show readers how we use their money, how we spend their money, and this builds a better relationship with the audience because they know their money does not go to waste. If you want to know more, you can send me an email. Thank you.
Love the slides. Could you actually go back to the slide just before this? Oh, is it gone? Oh, there we go. So can you, for those of us that don't speak Dutch, could you just tell us briefly what these
yes.
headers are?
So 55.4% go to wages and things like travel, etc. Then you have other costs. I actually don't know what these are, but it's
That's
probably costs like ordinary stamps, office supplies,
Yeah.
etc., etc. Marketing and events is 0.8%. These are numbers over 2015, by the way. 2.5% is rent. 5.8% is newsroom costs. We don't really have a newsroom as such, just an office, but that's actually a good question. I'm glancing over to your side. Do you know? My deputy editor, yeah. Notebooks, yeah, okay.
Oh, yeah.
And then 5.8% is the illustrators, because all our articles... did someone ask a question? No,
Oh,
okay. 9.1% actually goes to new development. So our money, we want to spend we're a for-profit medium, but we want to spend all our money on actually developing our platform. And as I said, 17.3% is tax.
And from a revenue perspective, not asking you to give us the exact numbers off the top of your head, but what's the largest source of revenue? Is from reader
Yeah, it's definitely reader
contributions?
contributions, yeah. So 60 euros and almost 50,000 members.
Yeah. And
you
the
can
Speakers Bureau is interesting as well. Is that bringing some revenue to you? Anything substantial?
Yeah, I don't know the numbers by
Yeah.
heart, but
Yeah.
for sure, yes.
Okay, great. All right, we can come back to that as well.
Yeah.
Thank you. Oh. 1 second, just wait for the mic, just because for the live stream.
It's 250,000 a year that we make with the Speakers Bureau.
250,000 euros a year.
20% stays with the company, 80% goes to the journalists.
I see.
So.
Oh, that's very interesting. Thank you. And Joyce, again, you've got such a unique purview over news organizations all over the world. Would love for you to speak a little bit about what's working.
Yeah, I can talk. ICFJ, the International Center for Journalists, has been around 32 years. And I'm not going to talk about our nonprofit business model, but we try as best we can to get as much private funding and public funding and corporate funding as possible. And there are no strings attached to any money that we take. We work primarily in the developing world, but not only in the developing world, where there are specific challenges that you don't see in the developed world. One of the advantages in some parts of the developing world is that the digital revolution hasn't hit quite as hard. And ICFJ tries to advance the quality journalism and tries to use the new technology not for technology's sake, but to find ways to deepen the coverage, do better investigative work, for example, expand access to information, and engage audiences in the news process with the hopes of empowering them with knowledge and so they make better decisions in their lives. And in some parts of the developing world, I'll just give you an anecdote. We helped create an app called Dodgy Doctors. Dodgy Doctors is a way for Kenyans and now Nigerians to find out if their doctor is licensed to practice medicine. It's on a website at the Star newspaper in Kenya, and people can send an SMS text in, and which generates a little bit of revenue, and you can tell whether your doctor is licensed to practice medicine. This came about because we had somebody who was working for us in South Africa who went to Kenya and got some meds because he got malaria and went home and got sicker. So his doctor called the Kenyan doctor and found out that the Kenyan doctor was really a veterinarian. So the tool has practical uses, and it's generated enough revenue for them to hire 2 health reporters. So it's interesting that the revenue from innovation is helping to fund more reporters. And it's incremental revenue. This may not last, obviously, as we get the full blast of the digital revolution around the world, but for now there are some possibilities. And one of the other things that we try to do with innovation is, in a lot of the developing world, there is just not the financial infrastructure. We may all complain about the money and the revenues, but we have a venture capital finance world that will help fund startups. I mean, this is where Twitter and Google and Facebook and all the new revolutionary tools all came from. People are eager to be angel investors or venture capitalists and put their money. You don't see that in a lot of the developing world yet. And so how do you stimulate startups that could change the nature of journalism in various parts of the world? So we've been experimenting, and it's not a ton of money, but it's money that is very interesting and is creating new startups, new ways to fund exciting enterprises around the world. One of them was an experiment. It's still experimental, but we have started a media factory in Argentina. I'm not sure whether it's going to last or not, but they incubated three startups there. 2 of them were in countries that were very, very difficult environments, Ecuador and Venezuela, and a 3rd from Argentina. What was interesting also about this was we started to see the rise of social investors who are coming in and are eager to back independent media Now, it's just beginning, but I think if we work hard, we may be able to identify some of them. And they may be very good candidates for promising startups everywhere around the world. So we're seeing some of that, and some of them are Latin American, some of them are American. One of them is the Media Development Investment Fund, which was, used to be called the Media Development Loan Fund. But they're looking at investing in promising startups that bring independent, vibrant news to their communities. Another way to create startups and to create an exciting financing backup for news organizations is we've had contests. We've had contests in Africa, for example, where they're in news innovation contests. And these news innovation contests pick let's say, the top 20 winners. And the top 20 winners will get seed money, and they will also get mentoring. And they have to meet benchmarks to get the kind of funds that they need to keep going. But a lot of these have become independent or self-funding or funded organizations that are very, very valuable. Others have gone on to get more investments from foundations, but many of them are still ongoing. And this news competition startup thing is quite exciting. I'm trying to think. We're also working with a lot of investigative groups to come up with apps that will help them, apps and platforms that will help them monetize their content. And we all know that there's a tremendous amount of investigative journalism going on around the world. And we're coming up with these tools to try to say, the West can take advantage of this content by just paying, some sort of small syndication fee or whatever. But that small fee will help power independent investigative journalism in large parts of the world. So I'll leave it there. I mean, there are just lots of interesting experiments that we're trying to fund interesting and promising independent news organizations.
Joyce, for the startups that have been successful at getting seed funding, initial funding, whether it's from private organizations or whether it's from foundations, what happens to them? What happens to them after they get past that initial funding? What percentage are you seeing are able to continue?
I would say the vast majority of them are going on to get more foundation funds,
Yeah.
which is interesting, and it's not the solution, but I think they are at least getting enough of a track record to go the next step.
Yeah.
The startups in the media factory, one of them I think is really taking off, the Argentine one. And it seems to have quite a few users. They've developed revenue streams in the incubator, and they're sort of on their way to get, to become a self-sufficient news organization.
Great. So thank you to the panelists. We're going to go into Q&A now. I've got my own questions, but I wouldn't mind mixing it up a little bit between audience questions and my own questions. So if there's somebody that has one right away, we can do that, or I can jump in with my own. Okay, looks like I'm going to jump in with my own. I want to talk a little bit about, just drill down a little bit on crowdfunding just for a minute, because, as many of you here, and Joyce with the organizations that you're working with, there's a lot of asks out there. Just give a little bit, and in each case, a lot of little requests can end up being overwhelming to even people that care a great deal about journalism, or confusing. And you worry about donor fatigue. I saw that, just to touch on my own experiences. I was the CEO of NPR, National Public Radio in the United States, which across public radio is funded to the tune of about $200 million a year by listener contributions. But that is less than 10% of the people that actually listen to public radio. And this is through decades and decades of all kinds of testing. Cracking that 10% level has been very tough. And many people point to NPR and public radio as probably, at least in the United States, far and away the most successful sort of crowdfunding, if you want to call it that, organization. So how are you thinking about that, and how how will you how do you cut through and avoid that kind of donor fatigue?
Yeah, actually, when we started, we'd also look at NPR, especially how NPR formulated the pitch with independent, be part of this community, and I think that really worked well for us as well. But probably worked well for us because we gave something in return. It was a share of a company.
Yeah,
so I'm not sure if it was just something like crowdfunding support us, because there are some experiments in Spain as well, and they got maybe 20,000 euros or something, just asking for the money as a way to support an enterprise. So I think probably for crowdfunding you need more, and well, we just done it once, so I'm not sure if we got repeating the experience, if would work so well. We were thinking, as we were at the beginning, maybe smaller projects like, well, we would like to investigate education or this area in particular. Will you support that? Or El Diario.
Have you tried that?
We haven't, but
you could really
yeah.
target people who are interested in a specific.
El Diario, that's another Spanish website that has supporters and some sort of membership. They have done, for instance, a pitch to do stories on refugees, on the refugee crisis, saying, well, we will send a journalist to Lesbos, a journalist to Brussels, and a journalist to somewhere else. So that may be a good idea, but of course it could be smaller, and you can repeat it linked to projects, but it could be not so much money, I guess.
Yeah. Others?
Yeah, I'd like to add something to this. I think when we started, there was not really a donor fatigue, as you mentioned it. Now there's plenty of crowdfunding initiatives for journalism specifically. And I think in the Netherlands they're also working out. But I think the way why it worked for us is that we had 3 elements in our crowdfunding campaign that turned out to be the right decisions. And the first one was that we chose a couple of personalities, people that everyone already knew, that could show potential financiers or members that, look, you know these people, you know they're good, so if you put your money into our organization, then you will support these people and bring our platform to higher level. And the second thing I think is really important, that we most crowdfunding campaigns start from a really negative angle. So if you don't support us, we will die. And this is a wrong intrinsic motivation. Your motivation should be, if you fund this platform, then we can make this happen. We can make all these beautiful productions happen. And that's really important. I think many crowdfunding campaigns start with the wrong motivation in that sense. Another thing that was crucial, I think, is that when we started, we did not show things we already had. So we could tell people that their contribution would make this happen. And it's not that we could also do it without them. That could give off the wrong signal. And the fourth thing I want to highlight is that we like to see people who pay a membership. We would like to see them as members, not just as funders. They're actually engaged with creating our content. We listen to them, we engage them in writing articles, we ask for their help when we write appeals on our website. Please help us writing or doing research on this and this. For example, a colleague of mine wanted to look into the porn industry, which is a really touchy subject, because if you look around, not many journalists actually write about porn, simply because you would have to go to all these sensitive websites. He basically crowdsourced for members who wanted to go to these websites and do the research, and he got a lot of replies. So
no doubt.
Yeah. So by seeing your funders as members, as expert contributors, you tap into a whole network of resources that journalists never use. So that's, I think, why our crowdfunding is still working.
Yeah.
That's why people still sign up as members.
Yeah. Great. We have a question over here. Who's got that? Yeah.
I'm Samir Padani. I used to work at Open Society. I'm not speaking on behalf of Open Society, but I'll draw on some of the observations, particularly about the crowdfunding. And I think what was interesting to me, I was looking at experimentation in journalism, and a lot of people would come to us, come to me, and sort of talk about crowdfunding as part of, almost as, you know, as you were sort of saying, as a kind of replacement for other sources of funding. But I think the thing that is really driving a lot of interest is, and it's backed up by research, for example, by Nesta in the UK, who are doing quite a lot of research about the nature of crowdfunding and how organizations across a whole spectrum of industries are using it. It's absolutely and utterly interlinked with engagement with communities. It's really not, I mean, probably the worst motivation is we need the money. Yeah. And I think that's the most interesting thing in this area. It's a way of connecting with people who have shared values, long-term connections with the work of an organization or a topic or a subject area. So I really want to reinforce that having been inside a funding organization where people were sort of saying, we are doing crowdfunding, we'd sort of want to examine more forensically why you want to do that, what the mechanisms are. And I think that that's something that, you know, even funders themselves are beginning to become much more nuanced about. You know, just saying crowdfunding doesn't really help. It's more, you know, really how does this fit into a broader spectrum? I think the Correspondent does an absolutely extraordinary job, to be honest, of, you know, they've really nailed one way of doing it, which I think is very substantive. So.
Thank you. I think that's actually an important point. One of the, you know, again, looking at public radio stations, you know, hundreds of public radio stations across the United States, the ones that were most successful didn't just pop up for a pledge drive twice a year. They were really fully integrated into the community, and the most successful ones actually had physical relation. I mean, they had physical touch points with their listeners. They were community centers. They were bringing people in, and it was a constant year-round sort of conversation almost, often an in-person conversation with listeners. And so the membership, or the idea of people giving, when it came time for Pledge Drive, felt like a very organic extension of that, rather than just, oh, here we are again, it's that time of year. Anybody else want to reflect on those points?
I'll add something to that, actually, is that there's a lot of interest in the nonprofit news world right now in moving towards a more membership model, which is not crowdfunding, but the way that you guys are talking about it is kind of the same thing. And one of the things that I see happening in a lot of cases is that there's this idea of, okay, we want to do our journalism, and we're going to have a membership program to fund it, and then we have to develop benefits to entice those people to give us the money so that we can do the journalism. And that seems like a very risky and sort of high-cost way to approach it. So I think that the models that you guys are talking about, where by participating in a membership program, you're helping to actually create the core product, the journalism itself, is like a much more successful strategy. And in most cases, I think a lot of people, as they're approaching the crowdfunding projects or membership models, are sort of larding up their plates with an enormous amount of cost in doing so. And I think that's a huge risk if you're considering that in other news organizations. So.
This is not necessarily a crowdfunding comment, but in a lot of the people in the nonprofit world need to show impact. Donors come back when they feel as if their money is being put to good use. And showing impact in journalism can be challenging. We're all thinking about how we can do that. But I look at the Panama Papers right now, and I'm the optimist, but I think there's a real golden moment at this point, because you have 400 investigative journalists from a variety of nonprofit investigative journalism units who work together to break the biggest global investigative story that I know of, and exposed huge amounts of information. These stories are going to be breaking for years. It's not just going to be the Icelandic prime minister that goes. This is going to have tremendous repercussions. And if you're talking about impact, I think investigative journalism centers have a wonderful moment now to say, this is a great time, whether you're private or foundation, or even government. This is an incredible time to be putting your money into investigative journalism, because look at the results that we're having in terms of good governance. So I'm kind of optimistic about the fact that we have a lot to show for ourselves, which can also help draw in funds.
Yeah, that's a really
I
good.
actually have a question for you. When I mentioned crowdfunding, I didn't mean that we're crowdfunding now. I mean, we're getting members to join our platform. I was talking about crowdfunding in the initial phase, but I was wondering why exactly you find creating benefits for an audience risky. Why is that a risky business model?
I don't mean that creating benefits in general is risky. I think that's what you should be doing. But a lot of times you'll see people say, well, you know, our core thing that we're delivering is we're gonna, you know, write, or we're producing radio, or whatever the content product is. And then for our members, you know, we're gonna do a bunch of like T-shirts and members only events, and maybe we'll have some special content that we'll put behind a paywall for members only. And then at this point, the cost of producing all of those additional benefits for your members becomes so high that you're not actually subsidizing your original project in the first place. And I think there's a lot of enthusiasm for like, oh, just a little bit here and a little bit here for this benefit and that benefit, and it adds up very quickly in ways that I think a lot of people in the nonprofit news space don't necessarily sort of take into account when they first start. So it's not a comment on your models at all.
And you're raising a good point, which was we've been sort of using the word crowdsourcing or crowdfunding to cover a whole bunch of different things that are all pretty disparate. I mean, there is membership, which goes under different names. There's crowdfunding. Usually crowdfunding is around, it's around a story. And then there is sort of, you know, kind of premium membership, which gives you access to certain things. It might be almost be helpful to think of it in that
We
in
have
that
tried
construct.
both. We are doing both because we started with a crowdfunding, but now we have the content that is open. We have ads, and also we have contents that are just for subscribers.
Yeah.
And I have to say that the crowdfunding worked much better for us than really putting some content behind a paywall. So what you were saying, I think you really have a point, because people were more receptive to the idea of participating in building something that paying for something in exchange for content that is closed. They don't get that so much.
But of course, the interesting thing is that the commercial news organizations are moving in the newspapers in particular, I should say, are moving in the opposite direction. I mean, the vast majority of newspapers now have some kind of, at least a meter, or some kind of paywall, or some kind of premium content only available to, you know, people, exclusive, you know, donors, people that give it at a certain level. And, you know, while it may not be very palatable, it does seem to be working. I mean, and even a lot of the sort of the shortcuts through, you know, Twitter or Google that have been, you know, or those are being closed off as well. So, because they work. Go ahead. Go ahead, Celeste.
I in general am a sort of supporter of paywalled products to some extent. Previous to this role, I was at GigaOM, and I ran the research business in part there as the product manager and editor. And I thought that one of the things that made sense about doing that kind of a premium product was that we had a very specific segment of our audience, and audience that we did not yet have on our free site, that we were targeting with that particular product. And to me, new revenue opportunities in general need to sort of think about that, like how do you find these new pieces of an audience that you can serve with them? And the idea of putting stuff behind a paywall to get more money out of your existing audience for stuff that they would rather have in a sort of free place doesn't quite make sense. Whereas saying, you know, this is a, you know, I think our data sales is a similar approach, which is, you know, we're publishing all of this information for free on the web in one format, but what we're really providing is sort of a convenience and a different way of interacting with that material to our paid users. And I think a lot of paid products benefit from thinking about that, like what is the audience fit, and how can you actually grow your entire audience as an organization by developing new products on top of the work that you're already doing.
What works for us in terms of the paywall is that, well, we do have a paywall, but it works in a different way. How often do you go to a website and you get a pop-up, or you can only read 1/3 of the article? We don't do that because it's annoying. You just want to read the whole article. So we do show the whole article, and when I would, for example, share it on Facebook, or you would reshare it, everyone could read the entire thing. But if you want to read the rest of the website, then
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah.
yeah. So
Yeah.
basically, we want to
Yeah.
lure people to our website through our content, to actually showing all content. And another thing I want to add is that we're a bit like an NGO almost, because we do not have T-shirts but the way we create benefits for readers is to make them part of a network, and that's almost a bit like how NGOs function, I would say.
You know, the one thing I want to say one word in defense of swag, which is, again, from my experience at NPR, the thing about those tote bags, you know, NPR and public radio is famous for the tote bags and the baseball caps. The thing, it's not so much that people think, I'm going to give, I mean, I can tell you this just as from decades of research across public radio fundraising. The mentality through this research that we discovered was it's not that people are giving $100 because they really need another tote bag. These are not people that need a tote bag or need a cap, but they want something that reflects their commitment to their local public radio station. And so it was sort of not so much a piece of merchandise as a symbol of their commitment and almost something that speaks to their identity. I mean, people loved to identify themselves as NPR listeners. And so that's where that came in. Again, you're right, it is costly.
I would love to have a correspondent T-shirt.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah,
Yeah, exactly.
Not yet.
We had a question. Sorry, we had a question over here. You were the. Oh, okay. All right, great. Sorry.
Thank you. I would like to ask our mates. You mentioned that in your website, the correspondent, you have international volunteers and
International volunteers?
Yeah. And how could you apply to this opportunity to work with your site? And also, general ask for all our guests: what are the good characteristics of a journalist nowadays? Thank you so much.
Sorry, can you repeat the last
Yeah,
part?
What do you think has to be the main characteristics of a good reporter, a good journalist nowadays?
Okay, you're asking the right person actually, because as the international editor, I'm crowdsourcing content from foreign reporters because we would like to rethink international or news about certain topics, which is very often national, even though topics like a basic income, they are cross-border by nature. So if you'd like to know more, talk to me after the panel. I think that would work better. And the good characteristics for foreign reporters, I think it's all based on trust. It's very good to meet people face to face, even though that's really difficult, but that's how you establish good connections. So we can talk about it after the panel.
Great. Next question. Yeah, here. He had his hand up first, right over here in the black shirt.
Okay, thank you. My name is Sven Johannesson. I'm a Danish journalist for a small Danish journalistic bureau. My question is to you from ProPublica. I'm sorry to say I don't know so much about your media, but one thing I found interesting was that you are making a revenue from data sales, and it made me think, what do you do with the possible dilemma between, selling your journalistic skills, so to say, to different organizations and researchers and stuff like that, and then also making journalists, maybe investigative journalism about the same people? Do you have some kind of firewall, or don't you even have that problem, or how do you see that dilemma?
So I run into this problem when I talk to our potential buyers for our data. Somebody who's interested in our healthcare data, for example, will be like, well, what else could you make? Like, could you get us data on? And I say, no, sorry. The data that we have is driven by our editorial team. That's who makes the decisions about what data that we have. And they decide, what they're reporting on. And if there's data that comes out of one of those investigations, then we will make it available. So you may not have been here for the part where I was explaining that anything that we get that's public is available publicly for free in some form, whether it's a downloadable data set that we got from the government, or if it's the interactive web application online that anybody can use and pull the data out of. So what we're really selling is sort of the form factor and the ease and the work that we've put into cleaning and reporting out that. So we don't hold back information from the public that we have. We just sell like the actual database files to people in that form rather than in sort of like a more published interactive form that's more sort of reader friendly on our website. Is that answering your question?
Okay, so you sell it afterwards, after you've done the initial research for the story?
After the story has been published,
Just
yes.
repeat the question, so yeah.
Yes.
Yes, so you sell the data after you have published the story?
Correct.
You have made the initial story, then you have some work, and then you sell it?
Correct.
Okay, but will it like affect which story you choose, that you can maybe make a revenue from selling the data afterwards?
No.
No.
I mean, I've only been in this role since November, and that hasn't come up yet. I don't see a way in which it really would. I have plenty of things to sell without having to encourage people to do more, and they have plenty of things to report on that have no commercial value. So far, no problems.
Great. Next question, please.
George Brock, City University London, among other places. Going back to crowdfunding and those kinds of things, it seems to me that the distinction that counts, emerging from your discussion, is what people will do once for a startup and what they will do recurrently. So my question for the panel, but particularly to Maria, is do you expect people to keep giving you money on this basis, or are the other things you're talking about going to replace that money? Because the NPR model is designed to be recurrent.
Absolutely.
Are you doing that or not?
We are not doing that, and I think it could be very hard for us because the crowdfunding worked really well because of the way we use it with this thing of the equity and the shares, and people were feeling that they were with very high expectations, feeling part of something that was on the building. But now it's more difficult because now we are out there. Of course, people are satisfied with what we're doing, but others, maybe they are a bit disappointed. There's always, when you are out and really doing things, it's tougher than when you are just an ideal project. So that would be, I think, very hard for us. Now we're doing a more conventional model of ads and membership subscription, a subscription model with a paywall, and also a product is like sort of a paper that we put there every night that you can download, and it's just for subscribers. That is a bit tricky because there was a thing that Frederic Fillou wrote on the Monday Note the other day, saying that it's probably very hard just to pursue both things, like high traffic, as we are doing now, and subscriptions, because in the end, high traffic is volume, and subscription is quality, less stories. So I think it's really tricky doing both things. And for us, the crowdfunding worked really well at the beginning, and I think the only way to maybe repeat it could be linked to special projects, as I was saying, maybe to cover the refugee crisis or something that is not being investigated, and now maybe we can do it with your resources. But our current thing, like NPR, I think is very NPR specific because they have a very strong identity and they can do that probably recurrently, but I don't think for us it would work.
Another question.
Hi, my name is Ansha Mina. I'm with Medan in San Francisco, and I'm curious about some of the burdens that some of these models place on journalists themselves.
Can you just speak up a little bit? It's a
Sure.
little hard to hear.
So I'm curious about the burdens that journalists have to face as you know, they're being expected to become personalities, to kind of, you know, to crowdfund or to be out there as speakers. Are you finding that journalists are, you know, writers especially, are embracing these new models for funding their projects, or are they needing to develop new skills, or are you finding that there's a swath of writers who are completely resistant and would prefer not to be out there as a personality, but just want to be able to, you know, do the storytelling?
Well, we we pick our journalists because they like this. They want to be conversation leaders, and it's not that we're trying to fit people into a mold that they don't really belong to or belong in. So the people that we pick, they have these qualities to be these conversation leaders and to actually make sure that they engage with readers, whether it be online or offline. And they all find it really rewarding because they're a journalist and how should I put this? They're not just sitting behind a desk typing stories. It gives added value to your work as a journalist to actually engage with people around you and actually have some kind of feedback on your stories, to take readers on a journey through your reporting, to get better as a journalist. So I think it's not a burden at all. I think many journalists would like to have the opportunity to do this.
So you don't have your journalists actually asking people for donations?
No.
I think that might help clear it up. Yeah. Another question. Wait, just back here.
Hi. I'm not a journalist, I'm just interested in the topic. I wanted to ask a question to the correspondent in particular. I was really interested by the fact that you are promoting basic events to share knowledge on...
You're currently what? Can you speak up? Maybe it's just...
Sorry?
Events. Oh, events. Okay, yes, thank you.
I just think that the events model is really interesting. It's basically taking the journalistic skills and to deepen the information and to go deep in the data and to report it to everyone. And for the moment, I understood it's not your core, the core revenue stream that you're having, but do you plan in the future to develop it, or is it just something that will be like a subsidiary thing?
Well, for example, we organized a big festival last year, and each of our correspondents could have their own input. So, for example, we have a correspondent who looks behind, who looks at data, but the story behind data, or numbers actually. So she organized a panel or a talk at our festival about statistics and when do statistics lie, and it was kind of a workshop, and this is an opportunity also to get reader experts to join you and act as a source, basically. One thing we always say is 3,000 teachers or 3,000 statisticians, no more than one correspondent. So these festivals actually help us in getting better content as well. It's just a side thing at the moment, but who knows?
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks. Hi, my name's Julie Pizzetti. I'm interested to know if any of you have explored the idea of leveraging training, for example. So you are doing events, which a lot of news organisations around the world have been doing, but have any of you ventured into the sort of more niche environment of providing, courses, whether it be on content creation or skills that you've learned from your own business models? Are you being that sort of open and transparent and monetizing that, for example?
I can speak to that a little bit. ProPublica does a lot of training, not all of it, most of it not monetized, except through sort of grant funding work. So for example, we have a program running this summer called the Summer Data Institute, where it's a 2-week-long program. We received 700 applications for a dozen spots. Where people can come for 2 weeks and it's free to get sort of a boot camp on everything you would need to know for dealing with data.
Appealing to academics, I imagine.
It was intended for early career journalists primarily. It was part of our work to diversify the pool of people who are journalists and bring up skills in a lot of sort of underrepresented communities and things. But I have been interested in looking at training as another source of revenue for us, because a lot of our reporters do a lot of training in other areas outside. They work as adjuncts in various other activities. I also think that there's a really large opportunity that a lot of journalism organizations don't take advantage of training people outside the world of journalism to do the kinds of things that we do. I mean, our reporters know how to do a crazy number of things, whether it's dealing with data and telling stories with data and visualization, yes, but also, you know, how do you background a company or a person? How do you trace a supply chain? These are all skills that people in business would really like to have, that a lot of our reporters have. So I've thought about how we might grow that business without putting, you know, as Ancha was saying, a huge burden on our reporters.
And the ethical challenges that go with that.
Joyce,
ICFJ obviously does a lot of work training journalists, but we're not doing it as a revenue stream. That's what we do as an organization. But a lot of times our people in the field will do training. We have night fellows who are now working with newsrooms, and we're embedding technologists in the newsrooms to help create data teams, and then the data teams, once they're trained, can then create all sorts of interactive content that can create all sorts of revenue. And we're asking also for skin in the game by the media players. So it's not a gift. They have to make a commitment to developing these in-house skills and committing people to it, and even giving resources, because in the end, it really can be transformative. In the Nation group in Kenya now, after this process of putting a data journalist there, they created a team, and they required that everybody on staff now know how to do data journalism. So it was organizationally transformative, and it enables them to do different types of work. Again, mobile, more apps, more different types of revenue streams that can happen. One thing that we haven't brought up that I thought was interesting, you know, somebody had a question from San Francisco, but the disconnect between Silicon Valley, which does help fund startups, and this global excitement and experimentation that's going on around the world. And how do we get them, like at a conference like this, how do we get the VCs to come and hear about their correspondent and all the other great possibilities here for putting a little bit of money to help create really exciting revenue streams. I know for a fact in Mexico, and this is interesting too, I talked a little bit about the investigative journalism networks, but a lot of them, and what's new now is that a lot of them are cross-border, and they're sharing news in ways they never did before. And they're using technology in ways they never did before, including secure platforms to share that information. But they're not, and they're also coming up with tools to keep the journalists safe. But the other thing they're doing is keeping the information safe through these networks. And so I think it's quite fascinating, and I'm building up to this one story in Mexico where a lot of the major media will not touch stories about the president, about people in power. They're just too scared to go near it. And there is a woman, Carmen Aristegui, who lost her job after publishing the White House story, which showed a conflict of interest with the first family and their home. And people now, when they can't publish, go to her, and she takes these investigative stories that are created through these networks and does, you know, her team does work on them and publishes them. She has 6 million Twitter followers. You can't tell me that there's not a revenue stream here for this, even though major media is not touching these stories. So I think there's some disconnect here, and we've got to get those people who know how to monetize these amazing news organizations together with people who don't, you know, who are creating them.
Of course, the interesting thing is people with that robust a social media following, many of them are making money as influencers on behalf of brands, which is, so if there's a way to think about them as being sort of influencers on behalf of news organizations, it's very interesting.
It's very interesting, and she's making her money now to support her team off Google Ads.
Yeah.
Okay? And I'm sure there must be other ways to make a little bit more money than the Google Ads, but it's the potential for monetizing that has to be out there.
Okay, question back over here. We're just going to take another couple questions and then wrap it up.
Hi, my name is Douglas Arayanes from Source Fabric in the Czech Republic. My question is for the El Español and for the correspondent. There are many different crowdfunding platforms now, and you at El Español, you used a crowdfunding platform out of Barcelona. The correspondent, you used a platform out of, I don't know which one you used, but do you have advice on which ones are best suited for journalism, or what we can use to choose among the platforms when we're trying to do crowdfunding?
I can be short because we developed our own platform. So
that may be a good idea. Because we use this small platform from Barcelona, and well, we were happy in the end because we got so much money, but the experience was not so perfect. So I may go, if you can build your own platform, that's perfect. But if not, I may go just to Indiegogo, one of the more established platforms, because they are so used to. Or even change.org, yeah.
Okay. Anybody want to take the last question? Oh, there we go.
Hi there. This question is also for both of the crowdfunding examples. Sorry, I was trying to see if there was another question out there, but
there was one more. Yeah.
And that is, I'm wondering what you think the role is of brand in the crowdfunding. So De Correspondent didn't exist at all before you made your pitch, and I think you said that you were demonstrating, Maria, some of your stories. So I'd like to hear more about that. And you both also had journalists who were known in the community. So how important was that? And yeah, if you could just speak to that, that'd be great.
Yeah, brand is definitely important, and yeah, our editor was very popular, and also he made sort of a big deal about the name. So he gave the name on Twitter on New Year's Eve. So it was like a big thing also about the name of the new media. So, and we were producing content from the very beginning, even if we didn't have anything. We were like 4 journalists or something. So we started with a Twitter account. I mean, it was the days of the Charlie Hebdo attack, and we didn't even have a blog yet, but we started just sort of doing a selection of content with a special tone, and that helped us a lot. And like a few days later, we started a blog on WordPress, just a free platform. And from there, we started just producing content. We were very few journalists, but still very dedicated to the cause. And we definitely, I think, focus a lot on creating a younger tone, and on just doing special stories. We did for months very few stories, but most of them were special because there was a good writer behind it, or because it was a long profile, or a very nice explanation with data, and that helped us a lot, and that pushed the crowdfunding a lot. I mean, the few things that we did like a gigapan, that's a gigantic photo when you can see everyone in a picture, with a demonstration in Madrid of Podemos, that's this new lefty party. That worked very well because everyone was interested in that. So we did few things, but like very attractive, and I think that helped us to just be well known, and definitely Twitter. For us, Twitter was also a big thing to push the content and push the brand.
Our brand is really important. Actually, we work with a creative agency from the beginning called Momkai. They developed everything from our backend to the design of the website, and the illustrator who drew all the pictures that you could see in my presentation. They made templates for presentations. I mean, that shows how important our brand is, and it's important to present yourself with a clear identity, so that definitely helped. And what also helped was the endorsements in the beginning, during the crowdfunding campaign, endorsements from famous journalists like Joris Luijendijk, I don't know if you know him, but he wrote a banking blog for The Guardian. Some American media personality, so that really helped as well.
And a video, I mean, I remember your video, it was very nice, and we did also as well a video from the very beginning explaining what we wanted, so a nice, really, really well done video, I think that helps a lot. I remember just watching your video saying we have to do a video like that.
In the same vein as the rest of the branding. Yeah.
Great. Well, thank you, everybody. I think we maybe didn't solve everything, but we've got a lot of really interesting ideas, and continue the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for
That was great. It was great.
It was really interesting.
So interesting.
We're trying.
To the seller. More and more content, as you know, is being consumed on platforms rather than on publishers' owned and operated websites or apps. So much of it now, again, being consumed on more and more on Facebook and Snapchat, and those platforms, of course, optimizing for the ease of consumption on those platforms, which makes it more difficult to monetize. And yet, somehow, the cost of creating quality journalism, the cost to actually send people to far-flung places, to bear witness, to interview people, to do first-hand reporting, doesn't seem to be getting cheaper. Of course, there are many tools, and we'll talk about those, that do bring some cost of journalism down, but the core function of first-person quality journalism, again, remains pretty expensive. Now, there are many models out there that you're aware of. Of course, advertising, both for print and digital, is not disappeared by a long shot. Subscriptions are proving to be quite successful, at least staunch the bleeding for many. And of course, everybody's absolute favorite revenue model is to find yourself a billionaire to pay for everything that you're doing. However, billionaires are in short supply, particularly after Panama Papers. There may be fewer of them. And so we're going to spend the next period of hour, it's actually an hour and a half, we may not go for an hour and a half, this session talking about is what are some of the interesting, promising, unique business models out there. I think one thing we can probably agree is for most people there's not going to be one but multiple business models, a portfolio of revenue opportunities that will allow us to continue to do the work that we do. So with that, I'm going to introduce our panelists. We have, for your convenience, sat under our names. Oh, our names are gone, but when that other slide goes on. Okay, now you can hear me. Hello, everybody. Thank you for being at this session. I know that this session is competing with a lot of other really interesting sessions that are going on at the same time, so I'm glad that you chose us, and boy, is everybody else going to be jealous, because we're going to solve all the revenue issues for the entire news industry right now. So we are streaming as well, so for those that are watching on the stream, they will also benefit. My name is Vivian Schiller, and I will be your moderator today. The subject, the title of this panel is Why Funding Journalism Matters. So we're going to take care of answering that question in the first 15 seconds of the panel, which is that none of you would be here in Perugia in this room at this festival if you didn't think funding quality journalism matters. And I'm happy to debate that topic, if you like, a little bit later. But instead, for at least the time being, I'm going to pivot over to what is perhaps a more urgent issue, which is what are the ways that we can figure out to fund quality journalism? That's what we're going to be focusing on today. As you know, because you are in this industry and you're in this panel, these are difficult times, and I tend to be an optimist by nature. So I know that there are going to be not just a solution, but multiple solutions. But just to recap, just to depress you a little bit before we cheer you up, it is sort of a perfect storm right now, as all of you know, with ad blocking now so easily available on mobile devices, and with its popularity, therefore, then increasing sort of people are reversing back and adopting more ad blocking on websites. CPMs for digital display advertising are significantly down. Really, programmatic buying has moved things, is driving prices lower and lower down. Immediately to my right is Maria Ramirez, who's the deputy editor and co-founder of El Español. And they'll talk a little bit more about their publications and what they do when I ask them to speak. Next is Celeste. Oh gosh, so Celeste, what's your last name? Lecomte. Sorry, Celeste Lecomte, who is the director of business affairs for ProPublica. Then we have Maaike Goslinge, who is the international editor for the Dutch online investigative journalism platform De Correspondent. I'm sure I've completely mangled that pronunciation. And finally, my friend Joyce Barnathan, who is the president of the International Center for Journalists, an organization I'm proud to serve as a trustee for that looks across the developing world, and not all exclusively developing world, helping news organizations be successful at what they do, including funding. So she'll have some interesting perspectives there. So I've asked each of the panelists to just speak for a few minutes about, to really focus on sort of they'll talk about their entire revenue portfolio, but to really focus on sort of a singular, unique form of revenue, just to get our juices flowing. I'll have each of them describe one of those, a little bit of those for a few minutes. Then I've got questions myself, and we'll open it up to the floor. So with that, Maria, I'll start with you.
Okay, great. Thanks a lot. Grazie a tutti per essere qui questo pomeriggio. And well, I'm going to talk a bit about El Español, that you may know. We were born last year in January. And what is more peculiar about us is the way we were born, using crowdfunding, but also a kind of crowdfunding that is not usually used for newspapers. At the very beginning, we thought about using crowdfunding just for small projects, but then, pushed by some readers on Twitter, actually, we decided to try crowdfunding, like a bigger crowdfunding for the whole project. And also, we decided to try equity crowdfunding, meaning that the readers wouldn't be just subscribers or supporters, but they could be actually shareholders of the company. We look at some models in Europe, also from like the one from our colleague Maaike, the correspondent, and another German one called Crowd Reporter, and they were very successful in doing crowdfunding, but in the traditional way of supporters, subscribers. We thought about equity crowdfunding because we really saw an opportunity where people could get more involved in the company, more interested in the company. And well, we didn't know if it would work. It was something fairly new in Spain, just the crowdfunding, and something like that had never been done in Spain. And as far as we know, probably for media, it has never been done anywhere. And well, we started with a small platform, not even a very well-known one. It was just a small platform from Barcelona. And suddenly, money kept coming. I mean, we were doing this crowdfunding for 1 month and a few days, and we finally got 3.6 million euros from 5,600 people. They could invest at least 100 euros, and the maximum was 10,000 euros. And well, for us, it was very surprising. It was the world record for crowdfunding for any media projects anywhere, as far as we know. And it definitely helped the context in Spain, because at that moment, particularly last year, there was sort of annoyance about the traditional newspapers, that anything that was perceived as traditional. We have new parties in Spain. Like after the crisis, there was like some hunger for something new in politics, new in media, and that definitely helped us a lot. Also, we have an editor who is very popular and who was fired after publishing some uncomfortable stories for the government, and that, of course, really helped. And well, and we started publishing in a blog some stories, like with a different tone compared to other stories usually published in the Spanish press, like more data-driven, more explanations, long profiles, and of course an investigative journalism. And with that, and a very strong campaign also on Twitter and Facebook, we got this enormous amount for crowdfunding. And well, the equity choice, the equity crowdfunding was really a mess because we have to just also hire lawyers, and it's much more complicated than a regular crowdfunding. But we think that that was one of the keys of our success, the fact that readers could be really part of the company, could own the company. So, well, we are thinking now that maybe we could repeat that experience in the future when we maybe would like to expand the project, but that's something that really worked well for us, and well, that's the most special part about our kind of funding.
Just two follow-up questions for me. Was your sort of pitch for the crowdfunding, was it around particular stories, or was it for the idea, just the idea of your publication?
Was for the idea, although we were showing also stories.
Right.
But our pitch was for independent journalism and another way to tell stories. That was our main pitch. Yeah.
And you said the range of contribution could be from 100 to 10,000 euros.